Welcome to the Zen of Reffing Roller Derby, Lesson 30, Junior Derby, Gear Checks. I'm Axis of Stevel, the author of this training manual. I'm filming this on August 30th, 2018. The content of this presentation is up to date as of this recording. Should this video become outdated or replaced by a newer version, I'll put a link on the screen to where you can find more information. And as always, you can find the later version of the latest version of the full training manual at www.tinyearl.com/zenreffing. A quick disclaimer. The WFTDA, MRDA, and JRDA are not responsible for the content of this training manual or this presentation, nor do they make any claims as to the accuracy of their content. Another note, if you spot any errors or outdated information in this presentation, please put a comment on YouTube explaining the issue and listing the time code. So Lesson 30, Junior Derby, Gear Checks. First, I want to start with a note about Junior Derby. I think in my last video, I might have made it sound like Junior Derby is just a bunch of kids playing Derby. Well, I mean, in a sense it is. They are 18 or under when they're playing, so they are, in that respect, a bunch of kids. But it's actually much, much, much more than that. Now, the lower levels of Junior Derby, the entry levels, the level 1 games, the really young kids, yes, certainly that's going to be little kids that are basically playing very limited games of Derby at times. I've seen an entire game where I think they only made it to turn 2 one time in the entire game. It was just, they just had these little walls. The pack never really moved anywhere. It was very simple. But the higher levels of Junior Derby are way beyond that. I had an opportunity to serve as the tournament head referee of the JRDA Champs and JRDA World Cup this summer, and I was absolutely floored by the level of play in these juniors. They were playing at least a high Division II level, Division II WIFTA level, and I would have loved to have seen the best of these junior teams go up against some of the adult teams that I ref with on a regular basis, because I think these adult teams would be struggling to even hold a close game. I mean, these are really, really, really talented kids. So don't just peg Junior Derby in your mind as, it's a little kid Derby. It's not real Derby. It is very much real Derby. And if your skills ever get to the point where you can go and serve as an official at JRDA Champs, absolutely do it. It's an incredible experience, and frankly, it's more impressive to me than a lot of the WIFTA playoffs. Yes, the WIFTA playoffs may have a slightly higher level of skill, but it doesn't matter. There's just this energy there, this excitement among the juniors there. I mean, the audience is packed. Everybody is really excited. I really, really recommend going and watching it or being a part of this experience if you can. So let's go back to talking about gear checks. Now, as I mentioned in the last lesson, all Junior Derby games must start with a gear check. It's absolutely required for sanctioned play, but it really should be happening at all levels of Junior Derby as well. While adults, we assume that adults can take care of their own gear. While we assume that the coaches are able to be responsible for checking the gear of their own skaters if they see fit. That's not the case in Junior Derby. The higher emphasis on safety means that all junior skaters must undergo a physical gear check before regulation and sanctioned games, or even non-regulation games for that matter. Now, the full procedure instructions can be found in the JRDA Pre-Game Protocol, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes here on YouTube. But the gear check, generally speaking, is either performed by the officials and supervised by the bench staff, or performed by the bench staff and supervised by the officials. It can be done either way. It's typically the captain's choice and is decided at the captain's meeting. Generally speaking, in my experience, most teams prefer if the officials perform the check, but not always. Sometimes they prefer their bench staff to do it. So there's no real magical training that officials have in doing gear checks. What they really have is just a basic level of knowledge, and certainly coaches are capable of having that as well. So if the coaches, if the team wants their coach to perform it, while an official just visually watches to make sure it's being performed correctly, that's fine. Now, gear checks initially involve making physical contact with skaters in their gear. I say initially because after halftime, a second check is performed, and this is just a visual gear check. You're just kind of glancing up and down, making sure there's no new cracks in their gear or they're not missing a wrist guard or something like that. But the physical gear check is actually just done at prior to the game beginning. Now, because of the nature of adults checking the gear and touching minors. This check should be performed in public. There should always be a member of the team staff nearby. As I said, should be generally a member of the bench staff, there, or at least someone the team is kind of authorizing to supervise the check on their behalf. But absolutely should be done in public. And by public, I don't mean, their locker room's kind of a public area. No. I mean, perform it right on the track right before the game begins. Let 200 people be watching. That is a much better place to do. Nobody wants any misunderstandings regarding the nature of touching minors in this respect. Now, a skater must grant consent before being checked. A skater does not have to do that. Begin a check by saying, "May I check? I'm Access Steve. May I check your gear?" They can decline. They may absolutely decline for me to touch them. That is their right. However, they're not cleared to skate in the game. They will have to be checked by another official or by their coach or by someone. They're going to have to get checked before the game begins. They may decline, but then they don't get to skate. During the gear check itself, to avoid any sort of misunderstanding, you should explain the check as it's being performed. Okay, I'm now going to adjust your helmet, or I'm going to touch your helmet. Okay, the helmet's in order. Okay, I'm going to tug on your wrist guards here. I'm checking for cracks. If you're examining someone's wrist guards, sometimes you're going to reach out and hold their hand or their wrist, rather than surprise a skater and just grab their hand and kind of yank it. No, just, pardon me. Okay, I'm just going to inspect this. That's good. Like that. Generally, the skaters are generally pretty flexible. They've undergone this before, but it doesn't ever hurt just to make sure they are informed, make sure they understand what is going on. Now, there's nothing magical about referees, that it has to be referees being the officials performing the gear check. Referees are traditionally the ones that are involved in this, just simply because they wear gear, whereas non-skating officials do not. But a non-skating official who is knowledgeable about gear checks and about what constitutes properly fitting gear, properly worn gear, absolutely a non-skating official may perform the check. And any official is doing this at the discretion of the head referee, which again, they're negotiating with the captains during the captains meeting prior to the game beginning. Now, as I've said before, skaters are not cleared to skate in the game until they pass their gear check. So any issue noticed during the gear check, oh, your elbow pad is way too loose because I can pull it and it basically slides right down to your wrist. So, okay, that needs to be resolved prior to the game beginning. That skater is not cleared to be in the game. Now, sometimes they can just go off and they just got to tighten something up or throw a little duct tape and they're back in 30 seconds and that's fine. Other times it takes them a while. Other times a piece of gear is trash and it may not be used. I've found on one skater one time, I found that their wrist guard had like a plastic insert, and the plastic insert was broken. So they had to go find a new wrist guard. They were not allowed to use that one. So any issue noticed during the gear check, as I said, has to be resolved before the skater participates in the game. That does not mean they have to resolve it before the beginning of the game. If it takes them after first whistle to resolve it, that's fine. They just have to check in with an official, usually one of the OPRs, just because between jams they can kind of call out to them from their bench area, and the OPR can quickly inspect the gear. So that needs to be that needs to be dealt with. Any equipment issue that is not immediately resolved during the gear check process should be brought to the attention of the head referee. That way the head referee's just got in the back of their mind, this skater is not allowed to participate. Matter of fact, if the head referee is going to absolutely want to make sure that the head NSO knows about this, so the NSOs can put a note on paperwork that this skater is not cleared to line up for a jam. Which means if that skater is cleared, say like after the second jam of the game, that OPR needs to skate in real quick and tell the head referee and the head NSO, just so they can make sure that the records are all in order. So if that skater then attempts to take the field, they're not being called on like some sort of delay of game penalty, or not being sent back to the bench like that. Now, the head referee is the final authority on all skating on all safety gear, and may request any item be modified, removed, and/or replaced. Now, this doesn't mean that they get they can take unwarranted rules in this. There are some very specific rules and policy regarding what constitutes acceptable safety gear and what does not. This is typically was found in the WIFTA risk management guidelines, which the JRDA adheres to. So the head referee should absolutely make sure they understand what those guidelines are. So, for example, if you're not sure what it means, if a skater has a deeply tinted, shield, like a visor on their helmet, it's like, say it's reflective in nature. If you're not sure if that's legal or not, then you need to go back and read that document as a head referee to make sure that you know it, so when it comes time to perform the gear check, you can instantly make a correct assessment on whether that is allowed or not. And we'll come back to in a moment on whether mirror advisors are allowed. A manufacturer's instructions regarding sizing, use, and maintenance always take precedence if they differ from the guidelines basically being listed, or like the instructions that are being given by the officials. For example, oh, that slider needs to be up here. Well, actually, according to the instructions, that slider is supposed to be here. The instructions, the manufacturer guidelines, basically, manufacturer instructions take priority over what the referees are trying to correct them to. So if a skater has a piece of gear that is really funky in how it gets used, even though it's legal, they might want to keep those instructions around. I mean, not that officials are likely to challenge them to produce the instructions, but it can be very helpful for them to have them. Generally speaking, no, skaters don't have the instructions around. So, but they know their gear as well. That being said, 99% of the gear you're going to encounter is going to be pretty much the same set of gears, so it's not hard to learn how they're properly done. So let's talk about what the actual gear check procedures are here. First, all gear may not display any offensive words or symbols. We talked about that in the last lesson. If your helmet's got a sticker on it that says "fuck Trump," you have to cover that up. It can just say Trump, that's fine. You can't say the word fuck, that's not allowed. That is considered an offensive word. All gear must be in good repair. Over there, you can't have torn, fraying, things that are holding on by one little strand that could snap at any moment. There, any sort of hard shell or insert, like the hard shell on like a knee pad, for example, may not have a crack in it. Now, this differs from the olden days of the gear checks in adult derby, when you could have a crack in it, provided the crack didn't go all the way across. That's no longer the case. If there's a crack in it, it is not allowed. It needs to be thrown out by a JRDA gear check policy on this. The helmets. They should not be able to slide, significantly side by side or tilt, extremely forward or backward. Yes, you want to be able to have like a very slight amount of play. You don't want it to be like so tight to their head that it's killing them. But you don't want it to be able to slide too much. A helmet should be low over the forehead, so not up here. So if they fall, they're going to bang their forehead. The front rim should be approximately at the eyebrows level. Again, tiny bit above, that's fine, but approximately there. The chin strap should be snug, but not impeding breathing, or not impeding the movement of the mouth. Should allow for about a maximum of about 2 fingers to fit between the strap and chin. Generally speaking, if you can slide 2 fingers, through, that means you got breathing room. You're okay in that respect. If you can fit your whole hand through and pull, it's way too loose, and that's going to basically slide. So it should, you should be able to slide about 2 fingers through. So I don't suggest you just grab the skater's, like helmet and try to put 2 fingers through, but you'll basically know, particularly if you, kind of adjust their head a little bit when you're checking their gear. So then you'll be able to see. Face shields are allowed or disallowed as per the WIFTA risk management guidelines, meaning you can have a face, you can have a face shield, provided it's not. And again, we've talked about this in a much earlier lesson. You can't have like the cage style face mask, no Jason Lives, anything like that. You cannot have an iridium or tinted visor on it, or like mirrored visor. A slight tint would be fine, but you have to be able to see through it. And by you see through it, I mean the person performing the gear check basically clearly seeing the eyes of the person wearing it. If it's very dark and smoky and you really can't see, then they cannot wear it. The mouth guard, you should ask their skater to display their mouth guard. They pull it out. They can certainly trim a mouth guard slightly for comfort or fit, but it should not be shortened basically or cut off before the molars. So it should go all the way back to their molars. Mouth guard should be able to fit when they place it back in their mouth. Elbow pads and knee pads should be snug, not overly tight. Our goal is not to, have it serve as a tourniquet, but it should be snug enough that basically if you tug on it with their arm outstretched, that elbow pad is not going to slide down. Knee pads are much harder to slide than the elbow pads, but it's the same thing there. They need both elbow pads and knee pads must have a hard shell that is not cracked or broken, and tape should be used to secure any sort of loose Velcro. This happens a lot on older gear. The Velcro comes undone very, very easily. If they've got like bits that are like hanging there or Velcro that's clearly not going to hold, they need to throw some tape on it to hold. Wrist guards, they should be snug on the wrist and not able to be slid in any direction, and they must have a hard plastic shell or insert that is not cracked. So basically something, here, I gotta lift my hands up a little bit there. But yeah, basically it should have some sort of hard plastic in-shell, something like that. Some wrist guards will have plastic on both sides, some on just one. Depends on the manufacturer's specifications for, the way those wrist guards basically are designed. As far as skates go, skates are not considered safety equipment. Those are not part of the gear check. Toe stops are not required on skates, so if skaters don't want to do without them, that's fine. That's up to them. So, and finally, any sort of jewelry, clothing, other item, may not have any sort of sharp or pointed edges or anything that could pose a danger to other skaters. Like some skaters, particularly from some of like the costume kind of theme bouts, will like to have little things that point on their helmet, little bunny ears or something or whatever. That's fine, but if it's got like a wire that's sticking up, well, you got to think in terms of somebody getting poked in the face with that wire. It may do a real number on somebody's eyes, so we don't allow that. So, but as long as it's just would instantly crumple if it came in contact with somebody's face, that'd be fine. But again, jewelry, clothing, things like that. If you see skaters got like a big necklace, on, maybe worth asking them to remove that. They don't have to, but it's often, you might suggest, that they do it in that case. So any sort of like ring that's got like a big diamond on it or something like that, not that juniors have a lot of wedding rings on, but, again, sharp pointed edges, that's really not something they want to be wearing. So, and that concludes our lesson today on junior derby and gear checks. Again, we've talked a lot in the past about in the risk management guidelines, we talked about like gear then. This is, again, very similar over here, except we're concentrating more on checking it like that. This is considered non-negotiable in junior derby. It absolutely has to get done. The gear absolutely has to work. Certainly has to work into adult derby. We just don't check it. We'll just, if we spot it, point it out. But in junior derby, no, we check before the game begins every time. So, all right. Well, I've got one more lesson kind of planned in my training, basically on certification and game histories and tournaments. But since certification is still closed, it's probably going to be a couple of months before I come out with it. So when certification is, reopens or about to reopen and the game history form is available again, then look for the next lesson. So otherwise, maybe a while from you hear from me again. All right. Thanks.